Pastor Gino Jennings has finally broken his silence, and this time it's aimed directly at gospel singer Leandria Johnson. From profanity-laced rants to rebuking the modern church, she's been called bold, rebellious, even dangerous. But now one of the most outspoken voices in holiness is calling her out publicly and unapologetically, and what he said shocked everyone in the gospel world. The church world has always had its share of outspoken voices, but when two of the loudest and most controversial figures in modern-day Christianity collide, it's bound to make headlines. On one side, you have Pastor Gino Jennings, a fiery, no-nonsense preacher known for his raw, confrontational sermons and his unapologetic stance on holiness. On the other, Leandria Johnson, the Grammy-winning gospel powerhouse with a testimony that's as raw as her vocals. She's known for cursing in public, drinking openly, and criticizing the very institutions that once embraced her. But here's the twist: until now, these two paths never crossed publicly. Jennings has preached against what he calls the modern gospel industry, and Leandria has criticized churches that shun people struggling with real-life issues. But when Gino Jennings recently delivered a message that sounded eerily specific, one that seemed directed at a drunken gospel singer using her pain to justify profanity, the internet lit up with one question: was he talking about Leandria Johnson? In this video, we're going to break down exactly what Pastor Jennings said, why fans believe it was a direct shot at Leandria, and what it reveals about the growing rift between the holiness movement and the mainstream gospel world. We'll dig into the sermon that sparked the fire, the history behind Leandria's controversial reputation, and whether this moment marks a bigger shift in church culture. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. If you haven't heard of Pastor Gino Jennings, let me introduce you to one of the most polarizing figures in modern-day Christianity. Known for his bold, no-holds-barred approach to preaching, Jennings has built a reputation as a fierce defender of traditional holiness doctrine, and he's not afraid to step on toes to make his point. Jennings is the founder and leader of the First Church of Our Lord Jesus Christ in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and he's been making waves in the religious community for years. But it's not just his teachings that get people talking. It's his unapologetic delivery and his willingness to call out what he sees as the corruption in the church. Whether it's attacking prosperity preachers for exploiting the poor or denouncing certain aspects of the mainstream gospel music industry, Jennings has never been one to shy away from controversy. His sermons are full of fire, often challenging both his congregation and the wider Christian world to live up to the highest standards of holiness. But this aggressive style hasn't come without its critics. Many view Jennings as harsh, self-righteous, and too extreme. His rejection of things like modern Christian music, secular entertainment, and even certain forms of church leadership has made him a divisive figure. Some people see him as a modern-day prophet unafraid to speak truth to power, while others view him as a man on a mission to alienate the very people he's supposed to be saving. What makes Jennings even more controversial is his stance on the modern gospel industry. He's repeatedly called out gospel artists, musicians, and preachers who he believes are more interested in fame and money than spreading the true word of God. His criticism isn't just directed at secular artists or ministries outside of his circle. He's been known to go after high-profile figures in the gospel community. For instance, he's openly criticized the likes of Bishop T.D. Jakes, Joel Osteen, and even well-known gospel singers for their involvement in what he calls worldly activities. Jennings believes that the gospel industry at large has lost its focus on righteousness and holiness, and he has no problem publicly voicing his concerns. This stance has earned him both admiration from conservative factions and disdain from others who see his approach as too abrasive. Now here's the kicker: despite his harsh rhetoric, Jennings has managed to maintain a devoted following. His church, though not as large as those of some of his more mainstream counterparts, is fiercely loyal to his teachings. For his supporters, he represents a purity of faith in an era when it feels like the church is bending to the pressures of fame and popularity. But for his critics, he's a preacher who thrives on division and controversy. A preacher of conviction, or just a provocateur? At 62, Pastor Gino Jennings has built a legacy of defiance. But as we'll see later in this video, his comments about Leandria Johnson have raised even more questions about the nature of his convictions. Is he simply fighting for the preservation of holiness, or is he just using shock value to stay relevant? And more importantly, could this sermon have been an intentional dig at Leandria Johnson? We'll get into the specifics of the moment that sparked this entire debate, but it's important to understand the man behind the message. Pastor Gino Jennings doesn't do things lightly, and when he speaks, people listen, for better or for worse. Leandria Johnson is no stranger to the spotlight. In fact, she's made quite an impact in the world of gospel music. A winner of Season 3 of BET's Sunday Best, Johnson quickly became one of the most celebrated voices in gospel music. Her powerful vocals, raw emotion, and unique blend of gospel with contemporary sound made her a standout artist, and she seemed poised to take the gospel world by storm. However, Leandria's rise to fame didn't come without its share of controversies. Beneath the glittering success, there's been a tumultuous personal life and an ongoing battle with the very issues that some gospel artists try to avoid: substance abuse, alcoholism, and public scandals. Leandria's struggles became public knowledge after her abrupt departure from the gospel scene. For a period, she didn't shy away from addressing her demons. She admitted to battling alcoholism, struggling with her personal relationships, and facing the pressures of living up to the high expectations placed upon her as a gospel artist. Her transparency about her struggles was both praised and criticized, with some seeing her as brave and authentic, while others felt her actions didn't align with the holiness that the gospel message is meant to convey. In one of the most controversial moments of her career, she posted a video on social media in which she was visibly intoxicated, a moment that led to widespread backlash from both fans and fellow gospel artists. The video was taken down shortly afterward, but the damage was done. The incident served as a stark reminder that even the most gifted and beloved artists aren't immune to personal battles. Despite her struggles, Leandria Johnson returned to the gospel scene determined to regain her footing. She released several albums, including The Experience and Bigger Than Me, both of which received praise for their emotional depth and spiritual insight. But while her vocal talent continued to captivate audiences, her personal life was still a point of contention. Rumors about her personal relationships, her occasional public outbursts, and her departure from certain gospel organizations persisted, casting a shadow over her career. One of the most dramatic and divisive moments in Leandria's career came when she publicly clashed with several high-profile figures in the gospel music industry. It seemed like she couldn't stay out of the headlines, often involving herself in debates with other gospel artists, preachers, and producers. Her feud with some gospel music industry figures was sparked when she made comments criticizing the gospel industry's commercialization, particularly its focus on money and fame rather than faith and holiness. Leandria was outspoken about how the industry was exploiting artists, and she went as far as to suggest that certain gospel figures were more concerned with building their brand than spreading the true gospel. This made her a polarizing figure. To some, she was a truth teller, bravely calling out an industry that had become more about profit than purpose. But to others, her comments seemed bitter and out of place, especially for someone who had risen to fame through the same industry. This clash didn't stop at words. Leandria was seen as a threat to the gospel establishment, with many of her peers distancing themselves from her. Behind the scenes, there were rumblings that some people in the industry felt she had burned bridges that could never be repaired. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite these setbacks, Leandria Johnson still managed to maintain a loyal fan base. She kept releasing music, staying true to her personal style and vocal prowess. But her reputation was a mix of admiration for her talent and skepticism about her personal choices. The gospel community was divided. Some still saw her as a gifted artist with a unique calling, while others viewed her as a liability to the sanctity of gospel music. And then, out of nowhere, Pastor Gino Jennings decides to speak out. But what led to his shocking remarks? Why did he feel the need to step into this mess? And how did his statement set the stage for a potential clash that no one saw coming? Was it just another example of his trademark controversial preaching, or was there more to this call out of Leandria Johnson than meets the eye? For years, Pastor Gino Jennings has been known for his unapologetically bold and often controversial stances on a wide range of issues, particularly within the church and gospel music industry. From his non-nonsense approach to church doctrine to his open rebukes of popular Christian culture, Jennings has made it clear that he is not afraid to stand apart from the mainstream. So when he called out Leandria Johnson during a sermon, it wasn't just another one of his controversial remarks. It was a full-on challenge to the gospel music world and its biggest stars. Pastor Jennings's comments about Leandria came during one of his high-profile church services where he was delivering a fiery sermon about the state of the gospel music industry. While speaking about the dangers of celebrity culture within the church, Jennings specifically pointed to Leandria Johnson as an example of someone who had misused her platform and fallen prey to the distractions of fame, addiction, and scandal. He claimed that Leandria had strayed far from the righteous path and was not a true representative of the gospel's message. To some, his remarks came off as harsh and uncalled for, but to others, it seemed like a necessary wake-up call. Jennings did not mince words. He bluntly criticized Johnson's history of public intoxication, personal drama, and her controversial social media rants, suggesting that her lifestyle was an affront to the holiness that gospel music and ministry were meant to represent. But what really raised eyebrows was the timing of his remarks. Pastor Jennings's sermon was being live-streamed, and millions of people around the world were watching, many of them tuning in to hear his perspective on the state of gospel music. The question on everyone's mind was, why did he choose to single out Leandria Johnson? What made Jennings's call-out particularly intense was his critique of the gospel music industry as a whole. He wasn't just targeting Leandria. He was also making a bold statement about the entire system that allows and even encourages such behavior. Pastor Jennings claimed that Leandria's rise to fame was a product of the very commercialization of the church, an industry where talent is often prioritized over moral integrity and where sin can be overlooked for the sake of selling albums and filling pews. He argued that the church had allowed the pursuit of fame and money to overshadow the true purpose of ministry, and that Leandria's struggles were simply a symptom of a larger spiritual decay within the gospel music industry. He boldly stated that no one should be allowed to represent the gospel message if they weren't living according to God's will, and that the church needed to take a stronger stand against the behavior that had become far too common among Christian celebrities. This hit home for many viewers, sparking debates across social media. But there was one big question on everyone's mind: would Leandria respond? And how would the public perceive a clash between a beloved gospel singer and one of the most controversial pastors in the country? As expected, Pastor Jennings's remarks quickly gained attention, and soon the buzz surrounding them reached Leandria Johnson herself. Social media erupted with speculation about her response. Some assumed she would take to her platforms to defend herself, while others wondered if she would stay silent and let the controversy die down. After all, The last thing she needed was another public feud that could further damage her already fragile reputation. For a while, Leandria did remain silent. She didn't post a response on social media or address the issue in interviews. But then something happened that no one anticipated. One evening during a live performance at a concert, Leandria dropped a cryptic comment that sent shock waves through the gospel music community. In the middle of her set, she paused, looked directly at the audience, and said, "Sometimes you have to let your actions speak louder than words, and sometimes the truth comes out when you least expect it." This brief remark, though subtle, felt like a direct jab at Pastor Jennings. But it wasn't just about responding to the criticism. It was her way of asserting her dignity and not letting the words of others define her. She wasn't going to get drawn into a public argument. Instead, she would let her career and music speak for itself.